The moon of Veth Crossing had no name most people could pronounce, so the transit workers called it the Silt. It earned that. Everything on the silt was the color of dried clay. The prefab intake halls, the ranked rows of temporary berths, the faces of the people standing in line, waiting to be processed into or out of someone else's idea of their lives. I had worked 11 camps before the silt. I was not a counselor, not a doctor, not any kind of relief official with a badge worth mentioning. I ran escort duty. I moved people from the intake queue to the medical station, from the medical station to the docket office, from the docket office to the transit bay. I was a man with a clipboard and a passkey and enough veth to sit here. This won't take long. That was the sum of me. I found the child on a Thursday third shift, an hour before camp curfew. Her name was C. I did not know that yet. What I knew was that berth 14 in Block C should have been cleared. The family assigned to it had been moved, their transit docket flagged by classification and pulled for secondary review, which, in the language of the camp, meant they had been separated and sent to different processing queues and would likely not see each other until morning if morning went well. The berth should have been empty. It was not. She was sitting on the edge of the cot, with her feet not reaching the floor. Small. Veth children read younger than their years to human eyes. Something about the proportions, the stillness they carry. Gray-blue skin, the color of slate after rain. Eyes that were almost entirely silver. Pupil a dark vertical line, like a crack in old ice. She was dressed in a tunic 3 sizes too large, and she was holding a torn piece of paper, with a docket number on it. Holding it the way you hold the last thing someone pressed into your hands before a crowd swallowed them. I said, in my limited veth, that she should not be alone in here. She looked at me the way children look at adults who have just said something true and obvious and entirely useless. I checked my clipboard. Her name was in the secondary review annex, C, listed as dependent, unaccompanied, pending reclassification. The line below her name had a code I had not seen before. I would learn later what it meant. That night I only knew it was not a code that ended with transit clearance and a seat on a freighter going somewhere better. I sat down on the cot across from her. I put the clipboard on my knee. I did not have any food on me. What I had was a water canteen, dull brown leather, military surplus, the kind that had been passed through so many hands the strap was worn smooth. I held it out to her. She looked at it for a long time. Then she took it and drank, and handed it back, and we sat there in the pale hum of the block lighting while the camp settled into its nighttime sounds. She said one word, in Veth. Didn't know it then. I had it translated 3 years later. It means roughly staying. I said yes, in the only way I knew how, which was to not move. The classification runners came at 2 in the morning. There were 3 of them. Runners work for the Imperial Intake Authority. Technically, they are administrative officers. They carry no weapons in the conventional sense. What they carry are data slates with binding authority and a stamp that can supersede camp jurisdiction. They use them with the flat efficiency of people who have learned that paperwork, applied correctly, is more final than anything that makes noise. The lead runner was a tall Veth woman in an authority coat, hair pulled back, eyes the color of old amber. She looked at the berth, looked at me, looked at the child. She said, the child's secondary review file had been resolved, was to be transferred immediately to Intake Facility 7 for permanent reclassification processing. I had been to Intake Facility 7 once, camps back, to deliver a document. I knew what the facility was. Nobody in that camp had ever used the word permanent without it meaning something that closed behind you. I looked at the runner. I looked at my clipboard. I told her there was a clerical discrepancy on my manifest. I told her that this berth was still logged as occupied under an active family docket. The secondary review flag had not propagated to camp intake, cords which ran on a different system, as I was sure she knew, and policy required that any dependent listed on an active family docket could not be transferred without a countersigned camp authority form, Form 7 Delta, which required a supervisor's stamp, and the camp's supervisor was not available until morning, as I was sure she also knew. I told her all of this in the voice of a man who has spent 11 camps, learning that bureaucracy was a wall that cuts both ways. She looked at me for a long time. She knew I was stalling. I knew she knew. C sat on the cot between us and held the torn docket paper and said nothing. The runner told me she would return at first light with a supervisor override. I told her I would have the form ready. She left. I sat back down. My hands were not entirely steady. C watched me with those silver eyes, and I thought, I have bought maybe 4 hours. I thought about what 4 hours was worth, and what could be done with it, and who in this camp I trusted enough to make a call that could not be taken back. There was a woman named Petra Foss who ran the free corridor intake desk. She was not officially affiliated with the camp. She had a transit authorization from a third-party relief body that the Imperial runners tolerated, because pulling it would cause the kind of tension nobody wanted on a moon called the silt. Petra owed me nothing, and I owed her nothing, and that was precisely why I trusted her. I made the call at 2:15. She picked up on the third ring, which told me she was already awake, told me she already knew something was moving through the camp tonight. I said, I have a child, family docket flagged, transfer to Facility 7. I need a free corridor transit form before dawn, she said. Berth number, I said. 14 Block C, she said. Minutes. She was there in 35. I stood outside the berth door, while Petra went in and did what she did. I don't know exactly what she said to C. I don't know what she promised, or how she explained where they were going. What I know is that when the door opened again, Sissi came out holding the torn docket paper in one hand and the water canteen in the other. My hand out for the canteen. She looked at it. She looked at me. She kept it. She tucked it under her arm like it was hers. And she walked with Petra down the block corridor toward the transit bay. She did not look back. Children that age, I have learned, rarely do. Not because they don't feel the weight of a thing, but because they understand, in some animal way, that looking back is how you lose ground. I went back to my clipboard. I filled out a Form 7 Delta with every box completed and every field technically accurate, and one date that was, under the circumstances, a generous interpretation of the chronology. When the runner came back at first light, I handed it to her with both hands and watched her read it twice. She stamped it returned. Unpacifical, clerical error. She left without speaking. The camp supervisor asked me about it at the morning briefing. I told him there had been a data propagation lag between classification and intake records, a known issue on the SILT system, and that the dependent had been processed to free corridor under standard unaccompanied minor protocol. He wrote something on his own clipboard. Never heard about it again. 3 years later, I was running escort duty at a camp called the Pale Reach, which was my 14th camp if you're counting, and a relief parcel arrived in the staff mail. No sender address. Routed through a free corridor relay station, addressed to a man with a clipboard and a passkey. Inside was a water canteen. Dull brown leather, military surplus, the strap worn smooth, refilled, sealed with a veth cord knot I didn't know how to tie. I set it on my shelf. I have moved it from camp to camp since then. There is no note, no name, no explanation. She didn't need to explain. I already knew. Some debts, you don't pay back with words. You pay them forward. To the next cot in the next block, on the next moon, without a name. You sit down. You hold out the canteen. You stay. That's all it ever was. That was enough.